Now at 5:37, two men are in jail this morning, including an up-and-coming Florida rapper. Both men are charged in a double murder. Police are saying the two staged a crime scene to make it look like a drive-by shooting.
This Florida rapper YNW Melly, as well as another man, are being held here at the Broward County Jail this morning.
Two people now behind bars, including a South Florida rapper who actually sings a popular song about murder.
Known for one of his biggest hits, Murder on My Mind, now the rapper is being accused of that. Ultimately, Judge Jackie Powell says the rapper will remain in jail without bond.
In February of 2019, a teenage rapper who had charted numerous times on the Billboard Top 100 was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The victims were Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr., and the main suspect in question was none other than YNW Melly. Williams and Thomas were considered to be Melly's best friends at the time, and the case in question became one of the most insane, confusing, and surprising cases in hip-hop history, and possibly all of music. Partially because of these 2 alleged homicides, but also because he is the prime suspect of killing a police officer in 2017. If all of these things are true, this would mean that at the time of his arrest, YNW Melly was a platinum-selling teenage rapper who is also a serial killer. Not only that, but the case is currently ongoing, and we are yet to have a verdict, but so much has happened with this man's life and career already that there is more than enough to cover right now. But before we get into the case, it's important to talk about the man himself, his background, his musical ability, and his rise to fame, before it all led to that fateful day. YNW Melly was born Jamel Maurice Demons on the 1st of May, 1999, in the small community of Gifford, Florida. His mother was Jamie Demons King, a single woman who was only 14 at the time she became pregnant. When Jamel was originally born, she was struggling financially because of her age and because she was raising him independently. A man named Dante Taylor claimed to be Melly's father and came out and said that this was her decision and that he had tried to raise Jamel in Ohio, but she moved to Florida and obtained sole custody of him. Because of this, Melly only met his father twice and had a strained and complicated relationship with him. It still hasn't been confirmed if Dante is actually Melly's father, but the publication known as Revolt TV claimed that sources close to the rapper have seemingly confirmed their relationship. This is about as vague as it gets, and we don't know who these alleged sources are, but one thing we do know is Dante Taylor actually gave a 30-minute interview to Nix 81 Digital Media, and in this interview, he talked about his relationship with Melly and explains why he was not in the picture as much as he would have liked to be.
Me and her ended up liking each other and whatnot, and you know what I'm saying, and we hit it off and like was messing around, you know, for years, on top of years. She got pregnant with our son, Melly, and she initially left. She left here. She was only like maybe, you know, not even a month pregnant when she found out. And then her mother uprooted her to go live in Florida where their grandma lived at. I was in a situation where I knew she was having my son, but she had went far away with him. You know, obviously, I'm not in a situation where I could just uproot from where I am and go move to Florida. Like, I didn't know anybody in Florida, didn't have any family down there.
This interview seems quite genuine, and the fact that he goes into specifics makes his story more believable. It really is a pity that there is no conclusive proof in the public domain that he is Melly's father, with the exception of some questionable pieces of evidence, but either way, whether he is the father or not, it didn't change the fact that Melly essentially grew up without a dad in a low-income area to a teenage mother. His childhood was definitely intense, as Gifford, Florida is a county that is both rich in culture and history, but also riddled with crime and antisocial behavior. Melly, unfortunately, fell victim to those statistics and began committing crimes at an early age. When he was only 9 years old, he found a gun in the house that he was living in and began to bring it to school with him. This began an obsession with firearms, which would carry on into his teenage years. A few years later, Melly joined the Bloods, who already had an established presence in his area. He was only in his early teens when all of this was happening, and it appeared as if Melly was going down a dark path that was not going to end well. Fortunately for Melly and those around him, he had a passion for music. He was inspired by the likes of Michael Jackson, Chris Brown, and Lil Wayne, and was described as a talented vocalist from an early age, as well as having an interest in rapping and hip-hop in general. It looked as if there may have been an escape route. If Melly could hone his craft, put his head down, and release music, he could have been an exception to the rule and an inspiration to those around him. In some ways, this is exactly what happened, but we know all too well that there were some very messy complications. At only 15 years old, Melly began to release some music onto his SoundCloud page with his friends, and these songs were pretty simplistic because of his limited setup. Fader magazine described his setup as a microphone held up by a coat hanger with a wave cap over it to condense his voice. With that in mind, it's not surprising that these early songs were pretty raw and unproduced, but there was a lot of character in these tracks, and Melly definitely shined through because of his charismatic and likable nature. Songs like 1K and Rock It Out were very clearly inspired by the likes of Lil Wayne and Young Thug, but still had a compelling quality to them. However, it was his song titled YNW Freestyle that really took off at first, and in hindsight, it's baffling that this was his second ever song posted onto his page because of how well it was received, and how young Melly was at the time. YNW was a collective that he had formed with his friends Anthony Williams, Christopher Thomas Jr., and Carlton Henry, and this freestyle served as both an introduction to the group's monarchy and as a stepping stone that Melly could use to further his popularity. He would post snippets of his early work onto Facebook, and this is the track that clearly did the best, pretty much from the get-go. It seemed as if things were working in Melly's favor. The collective was established, he had a small but loyal fan base, especially locally, and he now had a song that was building momentum every single day. And lest we forget, he was only 16 years of age. The future was seemingly bright, but unfortunately, his violent past and gang associations would catch up with him. On the 19th of October 2015, Melly was involved in a shootout near Vero Beach High School. An old report from Treasure Coast newspapers disclosed some of the details of the case, and more specifically, Melly's punishment for this crime. DeMons, a student at the Freshman Learning Center, was charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of discharging a firearm in public. Police said they recovered a semi-automatic weapon Monday evening after DeMons told officers where it could be found. DeMons was being held at the Juvenile Justice Center in Fort Pierce. Luckily, nobody was shot during this exchange, but regardless, this would seem like a major blow to Melly's very young career, and at first it definitely was. He now had to spend a year in a juvenile center because of these crimes, meaning he couldn't even enjoy the small amount of popularity he had managed to achieve. But as it turns out, this would prove to be a very important year of Melly's life, as he spent his year in jail, honing his craft and working on his music. Most importantly, Melly wrote a haunting song that would change his career and his life forever. While Melly was still in prison, he released the Collect Call EP, a 12-track project that featured Lil B, John Wicks, and Jay Green, amongst others. The songs Catching Feelings and 772 Love would pick up some steam and later do quite well on streaming services, but for the most part, this EP went relatively under the radar in comparison to his later projects. Some of Melly's early work was compelling, but it wasn't produced all that well, and there were definitely some obvious flaws in his music. This is to be expected, and these problems would more than likely go away as he achieved more success. But one flaw that couldn't necessarily be fixed with money was Melly's songwriting ability. Although he had some fun punchlines and wordplay in his earlier tracks, there was definitely a lack of substance. But this would change when Melly was in jail. He wrote song after song after song, and began to play around with narratives, rhyme schemes, and melodies. With the very limited tools that he had in prison, Melly honed his craft and improved at a rapid pace. By the time he came out of prison, he had penned countless tracks, and these songs were a significant step up from his early work. One song in particular was titled Murder on My Mind, and it was a harrowing and dark track that talked about things like Melly's experience in jail, his growing paranoia, and the depressing thoughts that plagued his mind. The song was backed up by an instrumental that was created by Smoke Evolution that featured some slow but effective piano chords that were contrasting to Melly's dark lyrics. While his first verse was a scatterbrained chain of thoughts, his second verse was very focused and specific, as he talked about the consequences of actually killing somebody who had just committed a home invasion.
Yellow tape around his body, it's a fucking homicide. His face is on a t-shirt and his family's traumatized. I didn't even mean to shoot him, he just caught me by surprise. I reloaded my pistol, cocked it back and shot him twice. His body dropped down to the floor and he had teardrops in his eyes.
This song was some of Melly's darkest work, and really showed the mind state that he was in at the time of making it. But it's not surprising given the fact that he wrote it behind bars, and he had been around murder his entire life. What is surprising is that Melly was only around 16 years old when he wrote this song. It goes to show how troubled his life must have been up until that point. He released it on the 4th of March 2017 onto his SoundCloud page, and at first, the song was relatively well received, but it wasn't nearly as popular as it would soon become. Before that would happen, Melly would release several more songs and continue to grow his already loyal fanbase. 300 Entertainment would sign Melly in the summer of 2018, and their first line of business was to re-release Murder on My Mind as an official single that was accompanied by a dark music video released in August of that year that was packed with disturbing visuals. Melly also got to work on his first commercial mixtape, which was also released in August, titled YNW. This was a 15-track mixtape that was definitely Melly's best work to date. It included a lot of Melly's patented trap-infused melodic songs, but it also had some more serious moments such as the tracks Mama Cry, Had a Dream, and Mind on My Murder, which was actually a sequel to Murder on My Mind, where Melly spoke from the perspective of the victim. It was a testament to his newfound songwriting ability, and it was clear that Melly was focused and set out to create a real future for himself. YNW did not initially chart on the Billboard Top 200, and neither did Murder on My Mind. But both of those things would eventually change. Either way, 2018 was a formative year for Melly and his music. He signed to 300 Entertainment, released his debut commercial mixtape, and a number of singles that would propel him to new heights. His SoundCloud page had grown from around 20,000 followers to about 100,000 followers, and his music was now reaching the millions in terms of views and streams. He was setting up for a very good year in 2019, and of course, 2019 was his breakout year, but it was also the year that he was imprisoned and accused of a crime that nobody saw coming. On the 3rd of January 2019, Melly was arrested for possession of marijuana and was subsequently imprisoned because of this. He has stated in multiple interviews that he was really imprisoned because of Murder on My Mind. He believes that the lyrics of that song and the fact that it was now blowing up was reason enough for the police to arrest him and detain him. Regardless of the reason for his arrest, it didn't really matter because Melly had enough work done to have a great start to the year. He released his second commercial mixtape from jail, which was titled We All Shine. This 16-track project featured the single Mixed Personalities, which featured Kanye West, and a music video for this song came out a day after the mixtape was released. The music video was directed by Cole Bennett of Lyrical Lemonade, who was already an established director at the time with around 10 million subscribers on YouTube. Between the colorful video, the catchy melodies, and the Kanye West feature, this song was basically a perfect storm, and Melly had created his first hit. The song peaked at number 42 on the Billboard Top 100, and his mixtape landed at number 27 of the Billboard Top 200. By the time Melly came out of prison on the 25th of January, everybody was talking about him, and he went on a press run to promote the song and his mixtape. After a number of radio interviews and promotional pieces, this run was cut short, and it was for a pretty insane reason. On the 13th of February 2019, YNW Melly was arrested for first-degree murder. The victims were his best friends, Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr., who were gunned down 4 months prior in October. Melly posted onto his Instagram on the day he was arrested and stated, "No, I did not get locked up in Washington, but I am turning myself in today. A couple months ago I lost my brothers by violence, and now the system wants to find justice. Unfortunately, a lot of rumors and lies are being said about me. But no worries, God is with me and my brother YNW Borleton, and we want y'all to remember, it's a YNW family, I love you." This began a long trial, countless questions, and an insane case that's almost hard to believe. But before we talk about all of that, we have to look at the case objectively and try and answer one simple question. Let's go back to the day the crime was committed, October 26, 2018. YNW Melly was in a car with his two friends, 19-year-old Christopher J. Thomas Jr., otherwise known as YNW Juvie, and 21-year-old Anthony G. Williams, otherwise known as YNW Sackchase. According to reports that were released around 2 weeks after his arrest, Melly shot both of his friends while he was in the car. He then drove around for a while before getting out of the vehicle and shooting at the car. His friend Corlton Henry, otherwise known as YNW Borlton, then entered the vehicle and drove to Memorial Hospital Miramar at 4:35 in the morning, where both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. Court documents were later released that present evidence that this was staged by both Melly and Borlton. They state, the gunshot wounds to the back of Thomas also indicates those wounds were inflicted after he was shot in the head, as the projectiles entered Thomas's back when he was leaning to the left. Evidence from the autopsy revealed that both victims' wound paths to their heads were from a left to right direction. This directly contradicts the statements made by Henry and does not support the statements of a drive-by shooting that occurred on the right side of the vehicle. They continue to make this point many times, but also show cell phone data that shows that Melly was with them at around 3 to 4 in the morning, and release Snapchat messages that show Melly praising Henry's loyalty and stating that he did one of the realest things in his life. Of course, this is not a direct confession, but the court document linked this praise to what Henry allegedly did on the 26th of October, that being driving the bodies to the hospital and helping Melly with this cover-up. There is obviously a lot more to this, but overall evidence of these court documents are as follows. There was obvious evidence of gunshots happening inside the car, contradicting the drive-by shooting theory. Henry's statements were consistently contradictory and did not add up. Cell phone data allegedly showed Melly at the scene of the crime, and Snapchat messages show Melly praising Henry's loyalty and allude to something that Melly describes as the realest thing he's ever seen. So with all of this evidence piling up, it wasn't looking good for Melly or Henry, and on top of this, it was revealed that they were also the prime suspects for the 2017 shooting of an off-duty police officer known as Gary Chambliss, who was shot and killed by a stray bullet in Gifford County. Regardless of all of this, on the 6th of March 2019, Melly pleaded not guilty for these crimes, and a long, drawn-out process began. And it starts with a very dark fact that still shadows this case to this day. On the 18th of April 2019, Florida prosecutors filed paperwork that stated they were seeking the death penalty for Melly, and if he was found guilty, this would be a very real possibility. After this, things slowed down substantially, but we can only imagine that a lot of small details and nuances were not being shared with us behind the scenes. What we do know is that Henry's bond was set to $75,000, which he paid in the summer of 2020 and was subsequently released while he awaits trial. But Melly has not been granted the same thing and has to await trial while he is in prison. This may have been because of the success of Melly's music after he was imprisoned. Murder on My Mind catapulted on the charts after he was taken into custody, reaching number 14 on the Billboard Top 100. It currently has over 500 million streams on Spotify, and it's clear that some kind of morbid interest sparked this newfound success. Melly has always believed that this song was a blessing and a curse because of its success and negative ramifications on his life, and in this case, it would appear that he was correct. His label also released his debut album, Melly vs. Melvin, and that landed at number 8 on the Billboard Top 200, making it his first top 10 and proving that he was essentially able to stay relevant during all of this because of his work rate while he was still a free man. This success was a double-edged sword as it meant that Melly was able to continue releasing successful work, but it also put a target on his head and made navigating his case a lot more difficult. The prosecutors would definitely hate the idea of him profiting off of these alleged crimes, and they would use that info to deny him bond and make him seem even more guilty. We can see this in the documents they released and the court proceedings where they reference Melly's music multiple times, specifically Murder on My Mind. It also meant that when Melly tested positive for COVID-19 in April of 2020, his motion to be released earlier than intended was denied. In November of 2020, Hot 97 reported that Broward County court system was reportedly reviewing an audio recording of YNW Melly confessing to the double murder of his two friends. But we haven't been given an update as to how this will be used in court or if it will even be considered a piece of evidence. And that is where we currently stand. It's a confusing mess, much like every other case of this magnitude, but it is one that many people are watching, eagerly waiting for the results. There are a lot of moving pieces when it comes to this case, and for the most part, it's best to just wait and see what will happen. If he is convicted and given the death penalty, he will most likely appeal, as 98% of prisoners on death row tend to take that action, and that usually leads to another drawn-out process. If he is found innocent and is released, then he has already shown us his capability to make chart-topping music, and as we've discussed, he's had to release almost every single musical project he's created while he was behind bars, so there is no telling how big he could be if he was a free man when he actually released an album. That's one of the strangest and most interesting parts about this case. If he wins, he has the potential to be one of the biggest artists in the world, but if he loses, he faces the death penalty, and at the very least, life in prison. Either way, it is a sad situation for parties involved. At least 2 young men have lost their lives, Melly's life is in a limbo, and everybody around him is in this strange purgatory, where they wait for the sentencing before they move on with their lives. It is not a situation for the faint of heart, and it's one that's taken away a lot of potential. And strangely, even though it's a story filled with carnage, murder, fame, and bloodshed, all anybody can do now is wait.